Welcome to our channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our spooky stories. The small town of Pinewood seemed to have come straight out of a fairy tale. Surrounded by dense forests and nestled by the edge of a crystal-clear lake, the place exuded a peace that seemed beyond the reach of modern-day worries. The white-painted wooden houses, well-kept gardens, and tranquil streets gave the impression of a perfect refuge. It was a summer afternoon when the group of friends arrived at the cabin they had rented for the weekend. There was Jake, the fearless leader, Emma, the sharp-eyed skeptic, Lucas, the ever-playful one, and Sarah, the dreamer and sensitive soul of the group. After a car trip full of laughter and jokes, they finally spotted the cabin hidden among the trees, with a porch overlooking the lake. As they unloaded their bags and settled in, the group began to explore the surroundings. The lake, in particular, caught Emma's attention. She wandered off to observe the mirror-like water up close. There was something unusually quiet and almost solemn about the waters, as if the lake carried a weight that was not immediately visible. The blue sky began to turn golden with the sunset, and the soft light enveloped the landscape in a magical aura. The group decided to make a small bonfire on the lake's beach to enjoy the starry night. Sitting around the flames, they shared stories and laughed, unaware that the night's tranquility was about to be disturbed. As the night progressed, a thick mist began to form over the lake, enveloping the scenery in a shroud of mystery. The stars twinkled through the haze, but something felt different. A sense of discomfort, almost imperceptible, began to hang in the air. The group tried to ignore it, but a shadow of unease seemed to creep among them without any apparent reason. Lucas, trying to lighten the mood, made a joke about how the night seemed like the perfect opening for a horror story. But his words couldn't dispel the growing discomfort. The silence of the lake, interrupted only by the crackling flames, seemed to carry a tension that the group couldn't explain. And as they prepared for the night, no one could know that the lake hid a darker secret than any story they could invent. The next day brought a radiant sun that promised a day of fun and relaxation. The morning was full of laughter and activities around the lake, but as the afternoon wore on, something began to change. The lake, which had previously seemed an extension of tranquility, now exhibited signs of strange unrest. Emma was the first to notice. She was sitting by the lake, trying to fish with an improvised rod, when a peculiar odor began to fill the air. It was a strong, almost metallic smell that seemed to mingle with the aroma of the damp vegetation. She got up and walked over to the group, trying not to appear alarmed. "Is anyone else smelling this?" as she asked, her voice tinged with slight concern. Lucas, always with a joke at the ready, laughed and said, "It must be the smell of nature, Emma. Relax." But as he looked at the lake, he noticed something unusual. The water's reflection, normally clear and serene, seemed distorted as if it was being gently disturbed by something invisible. The group decided to ignore the smell and stick to the day's plan. That night, as they prepared for another gathering around the bonfire, the atmosphere began to change. The lake was completely silent, a silence so deep it felt almost palpable. The mist began to form again, denser than before, enveloping the landscape in a ghostly shroud. Emma, trying to lighten the tension, suggested they take a walk around the lake area. As they walked along the trail, one of the friends, Sarah, suddenly stopped and pointed to the lakeshore. Look at this!" as she exclaimed, her voice trembling. On the ground were strange marks, as if something large had come out of the water and walked on the land. The marks were deep and irregular, stretching to the water where the lake seemed to have been recently disturbed. The unease among them grew. The group tried to rationalize what they were seeing. Jake suggested they might be animal tracks, but Emma and Sarah were not convinced. This doesn't look like anything I've ever seen before," Emma said, her voice dropping to a whisper. As night fell, the group returned to the cabin, trying to distract themselves and maintain a good mood. But the atmosphere around the lake seemed to become denser and more oppressive. The thick mist continued to form, and the metallic odor seemed to have intensified, hanging in the air like an invisible threat. The group settled around the bonfire, but the feeling of discomfort persisted. Something was clearly wrong, and although they tried to ignore it, the sensation of being watched began to settle in, silent and disturbing, as if something sinister was preparing to reveal itself. Night fell like a heavy shroud, covering the small cabin and the lake with an almost palpable darkness. The group was sitting around the bonfire, trying to distract themselves from the uncomfortable sensations that had arisen earlier. The flames cast dancing shadows on the surrounding trees, creating a play of light and dark that seemed even more unsettling under the mist forming over the lake. Jake, in an attempt to normalize the situation, proposed a round of stories. Let's do this to distract ourselves," he said, trying to hide his own unease. As the group began telling ghost stories and urban legends, the tension in the air seemed to lessen a bit, but the feeling of discomfort still lingered. It was then that Lucas, after drinking a bit more than usual, decided to venture to the lake to take a closer look. "I'm just going to check out the water," he said, laughing to the group. "If I don't come back in 10 minutes, call the rescue." With a playful wave, he walked away, disappearing into the darkness. Emma and Sarah tried to laugh at the situation, but an anxious look passed between them. The silence that followed seemed charged with a sinister expectation. A few minutes passed, and as the anxiety grew, Jake stood up. "I'll go check if he's okay," he said, forcing a smile. Jake approached the lake, his heart beating faster with each step. The mist seemed denser now, and the lake was in total silence, a calm almost surreal. He called for Lucas, his voice sounding strange and echoing in the void. Lucas, are you there?" Jake shouted, trying to stay calm. No response. The silence was so deep it felt almost oppressive. Then suddenly, he heard a faint sound, as if something was moving in the water. He approached the shore and illuminated the lake with a flashlight. It was then that he saw it. The waters were churning, and an indistinct figure seemed to be moving beneath the surface, its silhouette distorted and unsettling. Jake's heart raced, and he shouted for his friend again. When Lucas didn't respond, Jake decided to go back, calling the others to help with the search. When Jake returned to the group, Emma and Sarah were visibly worried. He's not there. The water was churning, and I couldn't find him," Jake said, his voice trembling. The group quickly prepared to search for Lucas, but the tension was at its peak. As they scoured the area around the lake, the feeling of being watched intensified. Nervous glances were exchanged, and every sound seemed amplified by the darkness. The fog thickened, wrapping the lake in an almost impenetrable curtain. The group was about to discover that the night held a terror much deeper than any story told around the campfire. The search for Lucas was fruitless, and exhausted and terrified, the group finally returned to the cabin. The darkness of the night seemed to have a physical weight, and the thick fog from the lake enveloped everything in a sinister shroud. Emma, Sarah, and Jake were in shock, fear making every sound around the cabin sharper and more unsettling. Inside the cabin, the group tried to compose themselves and discuss what to do next. Jake began recalling the stories he'd heard from the locals about the lake. There was something strange about the stories, he said, his voice trembling. They talk about a creature that appears on foggy nights. Emma and Sarah listened intently as Jake sifted through some notes and articles he found in the cabin. Among the papers was an old, yellowed newspaper that spoke of inexplicable disappearances in the region decades ago. The pages detailed bizarre events and accounts of a monster from the depths, said to be responsible for the tragedies. With wide eyes, Sarah picked up a notebook from one of the cabin's cupboards. It was the diary of a local hunter, dated many decades ago. She flipped through the pages, which were filled with detailed descriptions of sightings of a horrifying creature living in the lake. Descriptions of an entity with glowing eyes and a grotesque form. The last entries were particularly disturbing, mentioning the urgent need to close the cycle before the creature became completely insatiable. As they read, the tension grew. The group was shocked by what they were discovering, feeling the terror spreading through the room. Emma, her heart racing, suggested that they should try to find a way to stop the creature, if it really existed. We need to do something before more people disappear, as she said, her voice filled with determination and fear. They decided to conduct a more thorough search around the lake, equipped with flashlights and sticks, hoping to find some clue that could lead to a solution. With a mix of fear and determination, they left the cabin and headed towards the lake shore again, now more aware and prepared. As they approached the water, the fog seemed to thicken even more, making visibility almost non-existent. Every step they took seemed to echo in the vast darkness. The group carefully searched the ground for clues when Emma spotted something shining in the water. It was a partially submerged object that reflected the flashlight's light in a disturbing way. They approached and, with great effort, managed to pull the object out of the water. It was a fragment of an ancient artifact, covered in algae and mud, but it seemed to have deep marks, almost as if it had been used to bind something. The feeling that they were getting close to something terrible and profound became almost palpable, and a growing sense of dread took hold of them. The discovery was the necessary push for the team to decide they needed to act immediately. Whatever was hidden in the lake, they had to find a way to confront it before it was too late. The true terror was only beginning to reveal itself, and the lake seemed to be preparing to show its darkest side. The night was even darker than the previous ones, the fog thickening into a sinister veil over the lake. The group of friends, determined to face the terror that seemed to inhabit the deep waters, had prepared for the night with a desperate strategy, to capture or at least confront the creature before more lives were lost. With flashlights, sticks, and an improvised trap made of nets and ropes, they approached the lake shore. The plan was simple but risky, to lure the creature to the area where they could try to trap it. There was a plan to make noise and create a distraction that would draw the entity's attention to the net that had been painstakingly set up. Jake was at the forefront, his flashlight illuminating the water's surface with a trembling beam. Are we ready? We need to act quickly before the fog envelopes us completely, he said, his voice echoing with a mix of determination and fear. Emma and Sarah were positioned, ready to activate the trap, while Jake and Lucas checked the area. The plan began to unfold as Jake and Lucas started making noise, banging on pieces of wood and shouting to create a chaotic scene. The fog seemed to intensify, almost as if responding to the frantic movement on the shore. Emma and Sarah watched with racing hearts, their hands trembling as they held the trap's ropes. Suddenly, the water began to churn violently. Rising waves crashed against the shore, and a deep guttural sound emerged from the depths. It was as if the lake was roaring with anger. The creature was approaching, and the tension was palpable. The flashlights barely penetrated the darkness that now enveloped everything. The creature appeared, emerging from the waters with monstrous force. Its form was grotesque and distorted, an amalgamation of scales, sharp claws, and glowing eyes that seemed to reflect a primal malice. The sight was so terrifying that Emma and Sarah almost screamed. The creature advanced with surprising speed, its immense and overwhelming presence. Jake and Lucas struggled to position the trap, but the creature was much faster than they had anticipated. It lunged at the net with brutal force, tearing it to shreds effortlessly. The group fought to stay calm as they tried to fend off the creature with sticks and flashlights, the situation becoming increasingly desperate. The attack was brutal and swift. Lucas, who had gotten too close, was struck with devastating force, falling to the ground with a scream of pain. Emma and Sarah, now in a panic, tried to help him, but the terror they faced seemed to intensify. Jake, his heart racing, attempted to pull Lucas out of the creature's reach, but the fight was uneven. As chaos unfolded, the creature seemed to almost feed off the fear it was causing. Its presence was like a living nightmare, each movement amplifying the sense of despair. With one last effort, the group managed to retreat to the cabin, the creature still roaring and thrashing in the lake's waters. The night ended with an anguished silence. The lake, now calm again, seemed as peaceful as before, as if nothing had happened. The group, devastated and traumatized, knew they had faced something beyond their comprehension. And although they had survived the attack, the feeling that the battle was far from over hung over them like a persistent shadow. Daylight was beginning to break, and the group of friends, exhausted and traumatized, sought refuge inside the cabin, trying to cope with the impact of what they had faced. The terror of the previous night seemed to have left an indelible mark, and the heavy silence inside the cabin was broken only by the sound of labored breathing and whispers of despair. Emma, Sarah, and Jake gathered in the main room, where the warmth of the fireplace seemed unable to dispel the cold that enveloped them. They had managed to escape the creature, but the cost had been high. Lucas was gravely injured, and the group was struggling to find a way to deal with the situation. They knew they needed to seek help, but they were also terrified by the idea that the creature might attack again. As dawn began to break, Jake decided they needed to leave the cabin and find someone who could help them. The idea of staying there, near the lake, was unbearable. With weary determination, they began to prepare to leave, trying to ignore the panic lurking behind every shadow and noise. As they prepared to depart, Emma took one last look at the lake, the mist now slowly dissipating. The water's surface seemed calm, but there was something deeply unsettling about the way the lake reflected the sunlight. There was a sense that something still lurked in the depths, waiting for the right moment to emerge again. Then Sarah, with a scream of terror, pointed to the lake. Look at that." She was trembling, her eyes wide with horror. The water was churning again, and a grotesque shape was emerging from the surface, as if the lake was preparing to swallow everything around it. The creature, though visibly tired and wounded, still appeared very much alive and dangerous. Jake and Emma, now terrified, tried to pull Sarah away from the window. The feeling that they were being watched and that danger was lurking became overwhelming. The group rushed out of the cabin, moving quickly to the car as the creature continued thrashing in the waters. When they finally managed to leaving the cabin behind, the group looked back at the lake one last time. The creature was slowly submerging, its grotesque form disappearing into the darkness of the depths. The road ahead seemed endless, and the feeling of barely escaping did not alleviate their fear. As they drove away from the area, the road seemed to stretch on forever, and the group wondered if they would ever feel safe again. The lake, now a mere blot in the distance, seemed to hold a sinister secret, one that would not easily fade away. They had escaped the night of terror, but the shadow of the creature and the sense that evil still lurked would remain with them forever, a terrifying reminder that true horror can be closer than one imagines.